Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus here with a look at the first chapter of Onell Design's Glyos System. When the full production of the line began back in 2007, its heralds were the beings known as Travelers. Phaedon and Vangelus were the forerunners, with Phaedon being the face of Glyos in its associated media. They were then joined by Sarvos. Glyos creator Matt Doughty's personally scarred Phaedon head sculpt would go on to become the variation known as Scar Phaedon. Later on, they would be joined by the villainous Fanost and the mysterious Gov'Urom. Together, these 6 base designs are the core of the Glyos Traveler lineup. Sarvos, Fanost, and Gov'Urom specifically were once part of the Custom Core series of hand-cast urethane head sculpts, but ascended to full PVC production as time went on. As the level of paint application can wildly vary from panel-lined and detailed to entirely unpainted, I'll mostly be talking about the sculpts of these figures. The main talking points are the heads. All 6 heads have a few very subtle unifying elements, such as their V-shaped forehead/eyebrow crests and their well-defined chins and cheekbones. Phaedon, the semi-skull-faced protagonist of the Glyos universe's vague fiction, may also have a bit of an evolution through 3 of the heads. There is the standard Phaedon, which then moves into Scar Phaedon. Now he is wounded with a gash through one eye and cracks forming on the back of his head. Finally, if you imagine those cracks worsening with age and experience, Gov'Urom might seem like a final evolution of the Phaedon biology. Similarly, let's take a look at the large-eyed visage of Sarvos. Imagine that he goes through a similar aging process, and you might see a bit of him in the sinister scowl of the Fanost design, albeit with a bit more of a reptilian bent. As for Vangelus, he's actually supposed to be a cybernetic being known as a synchroid. He's got the thinnest and most human-looking head, but still has enough line work to feasibly evolve into something more. You can also see the basis of the Glyos aesthetic in these guys. It's a mishmash of retro-stylish elements from things like classic video games, Microman, Muscle Men, and more. The homages in Glyos hit hard, fast, and through paint schemes as well, so multitudinously that they may start to hurt. So I won't dwell on them too much. Just think of these as evolved 80s action figures from that forgotten NES game you played as a kid. It hit home with me surprisingly well, but definitely is not something that every collector will click with immediately, if at all. The first secret of the Glyos toy line is that every single component uses the same style of peg, which connects into the same style of port. And the first outright accessories for these figures came in the form of the Phase Arms and Gobon Blasters 2-packs. Adding a phase arm can be as simple as popping off one of the arms of the Traveler and plugging the phase arm on in its place. It's sort of the same science as Mega Man's arm cannon, allowing a Traveler to have ranged weaponry. The Gobon Blaster works the same way, though its aesthetics are tied a bit more to another Glyos universe denizen. The true potential of these components are that they can break down into 5 unique pieces for the purposes of using Glyos as a figure-building toy line, rather than a set-in-stone action figure series. These pieces were what kickstarted that aspect quite heavily, letting you create big techy shoulder pads, limb extensions, or anything else you can think of. So the elephant in the room when you talk about Glyos with someone who's never seen a Glyos before is posability. This guy's got basic swivel joints at his shoulders and his hips, as well as some turning swivelness at his neck and his waist. You'll notice those are all swivel joints. That's because a Glyos joint is pretty much the connection point between a Glyos pin and a hole for Glyos pins. That forms a pretty decent swivel joint. What this means is all his most dynamic points of articulation I've just shown you. However, he's got a few other ones which are a bit more subtle, such as points at his wrists. He's also got this mid-leg swiveled right above the knee, and he's got a swivel right at the ankle. This means that, unfortunately, Glyos lacks outright hinges, but this does mean you get these more subtle points of articulation, and there are a few other things you can do to get a few more dynamic poses out of these guys. The simplest of which being that you can just reverse how the bicep is connected. By flipping it around, you get this sort of bent elbow pose. This looks really cool from certain angles. He's going all like, "What's going on? Hello? Oh no, the sun." But if you bend things in other directions, it just looks really weird, because it is locked in this position. Similarly, you can do the same thing with this bicep, and now it's pointing outwards just slightly more and looks maybe a little bit more dynamic than it did before. So now you've got this guy going all like, I am getting ready to fly and punch a fool. And then, on the other hand, you might bring in one of these guys who is the same figure, just assembled slightly differently. And you can see they just look a bit different. In the legs, too, you can reverse how the leg is assembled by, like, swiveling this around to make it a bit straighter, or go in reverse to make it a bit more bent. You'll see that these guys have their legs oriented just slightly differently, even though they are built of the same parts. This is not all that Glyos has to offer. There's one other trick, which has to do with the PVC these guys are made of, which is that you can kind of just half-plug a piece in, and depending on how you do it, you can get it to kind of stay in this sort of tilted fashion, even though it's just not fully plugged in. This is kind of solid, provided you don't bang these guys around, because if I do this, it'll pop back in place, or it might have just popped his head off. Once you start working in phase arms, things do get a little bit different, because these things have a few extra holes, and they mean that you can start playing around a little bit more with how the quote-unquote articulation will work. This guy's got the same basic points as the travel I just showed you, but because of the phase arms, he's actually got this sideways swivel, and these kind of joint setups mean that you get very specific poses that can look pretty different. Like here, he's kind of cradling the gun, or if you flip things around and tilt his head the right way, now it looks like he's totally going to go fire the gun. So that's kind of cool. However, a lot of modern action figure collectors do demand posability, and I'm one of those people, or at least I was going in. I'm cooler with this now. But the way I got into Glyos was thanks to these things, because these are Glyos pieces that connect diagonally, or at least diagonally when in tandem with their normal connection points here. And what this means is that with one of these, you can create a little Glyos dude like this, who's now got the equivalent of universal joints at his shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows. And this is a whole lot more exciting, because while these joints are not quite as easy to use as a full-on ball joint, they do allow for more varied posability. And it's still pretty solid to have this guy stand in place and look like he's ready to bring it on. And let's say that you take some of these and some of those phase arms and some of these travelers and just go crazy. I'm going to move this back to show you what happens when you get crazy. You can build something nuts like this. This guy's still fully posable, but he's clearly much taller. And he's got, a weirder foot setup, but it all kind of works, and it even allows for him to have, like, an ankle tilt. So that's kind of neat. I'm sorry, what's the problem? I'm talking about my axis joints. Oh, really? Okay, well, this is an axis joint, and actually, let's not do things so amateur. Let's go post-produced, baby. Hit the music. Okay, I ain't got music, but start the clip already. This is embarrassing. First releasing in limited quantities on October 15th of 2010, the Axis joints brought about a new renaissance in the Glyos series' potential. Consisting of 11 unique pieces, the basic shapes are those of 2 large spheres, 2 small spheres, 2 shorter limb pieces, and a central disc. The spheres are the most prominent game changers, allowing a Glyos figure to suddenly gain the equivalent of a universal joint. The limb pieces are good for maintaining a decent physical aesthetic in tandem with the axis spheres, while the disc can add a nice bit of height to a figure. Of course, if you split the spheres in half and operate outside of the confines I just suggested, you can go crazy with whatever build concept you want to do. The bigger vague concepts these pieces provide are those of angular movement, shifting axes, and subtle tilts and bends. These are the pieces that got me interested in Glyos, and I believe they are what make the line accessible to a much larger audience in both letting the figures be posable and letting build junkies have a larger palette to play with. The Travelers are the core of Glyos as a universe, and I consider the combination of them with the phase arms, Gobon blasters, and axis joints to be the core of Glyos as a toy line. These pieces alone show the original aesthetic of Matt Doughty's designs, and the very first layer of the series' potential for simple customization as a building toy. But don't get me wrong, this is not an example of everything Glyos is capable of. A lot more has come out beyond these 3 basic components, and more is on the way. If you think the idea is neat but the execution is a bit limited, then make sure you stay tuned as I open up more of the line in upcoming videos. Speaking for myself, it was the axis joints in tandem with other Glyos pieces such as the Buildmen and Gobons that locked me into wanting to explore this line beyond my initial order. By the way, now is probably the best time to mention that Glyos is an independent toy line that operates primarily on one man's schedule. In its nigh on 5 years of existence, there have been tons of color scheme variations, as well as countless custom paint jobs by artists who found inspiration in this PVC palette. If you want to pick up some of your own, go to glyos.com and check the blog regularly for release info, as well as the store to see what's currently in stock. While color schemes rarely make a reappearance, the molds themselves constantly refresh one way or another. Also, hit up the Glyos boards on October Toys and see if anybody's selling spare bits if you can't find what you're looking for. Or if you really gotta have that one certain translucent color fadin'. Glyos is a designer toy line that takes way more cues from the word toy than almost any other similar series on the market. Its aesthetics are driven by some very specific retro tastes, and its playstyles are definitely not for everyone. But I would heartily recommend that anyone give it at least one go, as it is one of the most charming toy lines I've messed with in years. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and I hope this video has begun to help introduce and explain Glyos in some way. I'll say it again, this is only the surface. There are a few more major moments in the line's history that added new layers to its potential, and this taste of Glyosity has only just begun.